So whenever I struggle with a math problem, I go to YouTube to see if I can find a tutorial that covers it. But sometimes they can be a bit hard to understand. So I found this really neat tutorial on solving parabolas from Free Math for You. However, I thought I'd explain it a little further for those of you who are also struggling with this topic. It's still a great tutorial, so I strongly encourage you to see it. The link is in the description. In the video, he imagines that there is a parabola that passes through an xy point of minus 5x and 6y, and that it has a vertex point where the parabola meets at point minus 3 and minus 10. In order to find a solution for the equation, he needs to use a special technique called factorization in order to decompose the numbers given for the parabola so it can be graphed. The general expression for the quadratic equation is y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. I know this won't make much sense yet, but hopefully it will once we plug in the numbers. It's not usual to put a multiplication dot between the letters or the parentheses, since the multiplication is assumed, but I chose to put it there anyway for the sake of clarity, and I will do it for the remainder of this tutorial. In this expression, h equals minus 3 and k equals minus 10. So that's all well and good, but what about a? Well, a is unknown. However, it's usually better to start with what you already know and then get back to whatever is unknown when you can see more of the puzzle. So let's start with minus 3 and minus 10, since they represent the vertex where the parabola has its tip, and plug them into the equation. If we begin at the back of the equation, at minus 10, we know that making an addition to a negative number is like subtracting from it. But since we aren't adding anything to it, it remains negative. That's why plus minus 10 simply becomes minus 10. However, at the minus 3 spot, when we take something away from a negative space, the result is positive. That's how minus 3 becomes plus 3. And there we have the vertex form of the equation. Y equals a times x plus 3 squared minus 10. Now we're ready to use the x and y point to find the value of a. So let's plug them in. Now, following the mathematical rules for the order of operations, we should resolve whatever is inside the parentheses first, before we do anything else. Let's do the addition one by one so you see what is going on. Adding a positive 3 to a negative number of minus 5 isn't enough to get us over 0, so we're left with minus 2. The next order of precedence is the exponent, or how many times we should multiply the number it powers by itself. Since the exponent is 2, we should multiply its base by itself 2 times. But we have a problem. What happens when we multiply two negative numbers? Well, just like when we needed to add together a double negative, we got a positive, so minus 2 times minus 2 is plus 4, or simply 4 since positivity is implied. But how do we multiply a letter with a number? Well, if we try the literal approach, we now just produced 4a's, but it's better expressed like 4a, much more efficient. Now we really only have to get rid of the negative 10, so let's move it to the other side of the equation. However, whenever we move a number to the other side of an equal sign, its charge is reversed. So if it's a positive number, it becomes a negative. But when it's a negative number, like minus 10 is, then it becomes positive. And since we now have isolated a, we're actually done. Now that we have found the last variable, we can use it to solve the rest of the equation. But before we start, let's discuss what we just did. First, we used the vertex, or tip of the parabola, point minus 3 and minus 10, to find the vertex form of the equation. Then we used another point the parabola goes through, point minus 5 and 6, to find the value of a. After a few calculations, we found that a equals 4, and with that, we are ready to move on. Now, knowing the general formula for the parabola, we can now plug in the remaining a value into the vertex form of the equation, and then calculate the input in order to find the standard form of the parabola. Now, the next step is a little tricky, but it can be done with something called the FOIL method. following the order of operation, we should resolve what is inside the parentheses first. However, that's not possible yet, so let's take the next operation and do the exponent instead. So what does an exponent that's behind a parenthesis actually do? Well, it means we should multiply whatever is inside the parenthesis with itself as many times as the exponent tells us to. So since the value of the exponent is 2, it's enough that we put them side by side 2 times and expand them. Since it's now a binomial, we can use the FOIL method to add the parentheses together. FOIL stands for first outer, inner last. So let's add up the first number in each parenthesis first. X times x equals x squared. Then let's use the x of the first parenthesis and multiply it with the outer number in the last parenthesis, like so. Then we get x times 3 equals 3x. Since we are done with the first x, we can now move on to the inner terms and multiply the number in the first parenthesis with the inner x of the last parenthesis. We then get 3 times x equals 3x again. Moving on to the last number, we get 3 times 3 equals 9. That leaves us with just one parenthesis with x squared plus 3x plus 3x plus 9. So now we just have to add together the equal terms that remain and we are ready for the next step. Finally, we are able to multiply the parentheses with the previously unknown variable a, which we calculated to be 4. So let's just multiply the number with each term in the parentheses. So 4 times x squared equals 4x squared. 4 times 6x equals 24x. And 4 times 9 equals 36. Only one thing left to do now, and that is to subtract minus 10 from the polynomial, and we're done. So now we're ready to trace the parabola. And here it is. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial.